They told you to keep going, keep trying, keep showing up, keep being the one who holds everything together, keep smiling through the exhaustion, keep giving even when you had nothing left to give, keep being available, keep being patient, keep being understanding. And for a long time, you did. You kept going because you believed that was what strength looked like. You kept going because you thought if you just tried a little harder, things would finally shift. You kept going because somewhere deep inside, you had been taught that a woman who stops is a woman who failed. But here's what nobody told you. The moment you stopped, everything changed. Not because you gave up, but because you finally saw clearly. And that clarity, that quiet, still, unshakable clarity that settled into your chest the day you simply stopped, that is the most threatening thing you have ever become. Pay attention to this. There is a type of woman who reaches a point that most people never talk about. Not because it doesn't happen, but because the world isn't ready for what she becomes when she gets there. She doesn't scream. She doesn't fight. She doesn't send the long message explaining everything she's been holding. She just stops, quietly, completely, and with a level of peace that confuses everyone around her. That woman is you. You didn't arrive here by accident. You didn't wake up one morning and decide to be done. This was a slow process, a long, quiet, invisible erosion. And while other women were still in the middle of it, still fighting, still hoping, still convincing themselves it was going to get better, you were already on the other side. While others were still giving people the benefit of the doubt, you had already learned what that cost. While others were still performing patience, you had already exhausted yours, not carelessly, but completely. Every last drop of it poured into people and situations that never poured back. While others were still waiting to be chosen, you had already stopped waiting. That difference matters, and it's the part they will never fully understand about you. Here's what this looks like from the inside. You were never the kind of woman who asked for much. That's the first thing. You didn't need grand gestures or constant reassurance. You just needed consistency, honesty, something real, something that matched the energy you were giving, something that made you feel like it was worth it to stay open. And for a while, you believed you could find that. You showed up fully in relationships, in friendships, in love, in family, with a kind of emotional depth that most people don't even know exists in themselves. You felt things that others brushed past. You noticed things that others never saw. You cared in ways that went far beneath the surface. And that capacity, that deep, almost overwhelming capacity to feel and to give, it was real. It was yours. It was one of the most powerful things about you. But it was also the thing they took advantage of. Not always with bad intentions, but the result was the same. People leaned into your softness and gave you their hardness in return. They brought their confusion to you and left with clarity, while you absorbed the weight they left behind. They called when they needed something. They disappeared when they didn't. And you kept showing up. Because that's what you were told love looked like. That's what you were told strength looked like. That's what you were told being a good person looked like. This is where everything starts to shift. Because at some point, you began to see it. Not as a thought you could explain immediately. More like a feeling, a knowing. Something in your body before your mind caught up. A quiet recognition that what was being asked of you, what had always been asked of you, was not sustainable, was not equal, was not honest. And once you saw that, you couldn't unsee it. That's the part nobody prepares you for, because seeing clearly sounds like a gift, and it is. But it also means you start to feel the weight of everything you ignored for so long. Every time you minimized your own pain to hold space for someone else's. Every time you explained away behavior that hurt you. Every time you talked yourself out of your own instincts because you wanted so badly to believe the best in people. All of that comes into focus, all at once, sharp and undeniable, and something inside you shifts permanently. Here's what nobody will say out loud. A woman who stops tolerating is a woman who stops being manageable. And the world has been designed around managing women like you. Think about that. Everything you were ever praised for, your patience, your warmth, your ability to forgive, your willingness to stay, your capacity to absorb, all of it was convenient for everyone around you. Your openness kept the peace. Your silence kept things comfortable. Your continued giving kept people from having to look at themselves. The moment you stopped, they had to look at themselves, and most people do not want to do that. So when you pulled back, when you became quieter, more still, less available, less reactive, it didn't read as healing. It read as a threat to the people who needed you to stay the way you were, to the relationships that only worked because you were carrying most of the weight, to the version of reality that required you to keep going. Your stillness disrupted everything. And here's what that disruption looked like. People who had barely checked in on you suddenly became very interested in your emotional state, not because they were concerned, but because your distance made them uncomfortable. Your silence asked a question they didn't want to answer. Suddenly there were conversations about how you had changed, about how you were different now, about how you had become cold, or closed, or difficult. Cold, because you stopped absorbing their weight. Closed, because you stopped letting everything in. Difficult, because you stopped making it easy. Pay attention to the language they used when you stopped, because it reveals everything about what your presence was actually doing for them. You were never cold. You were recalibrating. You were never closed. You were protecting something that had been broken too many times. You were never difficult. You were simply no longer willing to pretend that what was happening was okay. And that refusal to pretend is what made you a threat. This is the part that hurts, because even when you understand it logically, even when you can trace every step that brought you here, there is still a kind of grief in it. A deep, specific loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from having been so present for so many people, and realizing that your presence was taken, not treasured. You gave so much. You were so willing, so open, so constant. And the truth is, most of them never really saw that. They saw what you gave them and assumed it would always be there. They didn't see the cost. They didn't see the nights you spent holding things together that were never yours to hold. They didn't see what it took to keep showing up the way you did. They saw your warmth and called it natural, as if it cost you nothing. That grief is real, and it deserves to be felt, not performed, not explained to anyone who doesn't already understand, just felt, quietly, inside you, in the space that only you can access. Because this is the deepest part of what exhaustion actually means. It's not just tiredness. It's not just frustration. It's the slow recognition that you have been living in a way that was never fully yours. That so much of what you were doing, so much of the energy, the giving, the holding, was shaped by what other people needed from you, by what was expected, by what kept the peace, and you are done keeping the peace at the expense of your own. Here's the reframe, and this is important. What happened to you was not a breakdown, it was a breaking through. The woman who stopped is not the woman who gave up. She is the woman who finally decided that her own interior life, her own clarity, her own peace, her own energy was worth protecting. That her softness was not a resource for other people to use. That her depth was not a service she owed anyone. You didn't become cold. You became discerning. You didn't shut down. You shut out what was no longer serving you. You didn't fail at the relationships that ended. You outgrew the version of yourself who was willing to sustain them. That is not weakness. That is one of the hardest, most precise forms of self-awareness that exists, and most people will never reach it, not because they can't, but because it requires you to face everything you've been avoiding, every uncomfortable truth, every dynamic you've been softening for years. You faced it, and now, here you are, on the other side of the exhaustion, quieter than before, more still, less interested in noise and performance and things that don't have substance. More protective of your time, your energy, your presence. People will call this change. They're not wrong, but the change is not what they think. It's not damage. It's not bitterness. It's not a wall. It's a standard, a quiet, solid, unmovable standard for how you are treated, for what you allow into your space, for what kind of connections you invest in, for what kind of version of yourself you are willing to be around certain people. That standard is new, and it is permanent. This is what they will never be able to take from you. The clarity that came from hitting the bottom of your own tolerance. The knowledge of exactly what it cost you to keep going the way you were. the understanding of your own limits, your own value, your own capacity for depth. You know yourself in a way now that you didn't before. Not the version of yourself that was always performing, always making sure everyone else was okay, always translating your pain into patience, always turning your needs into questions instead of statements. The version of yourself that exists underneath all of that. She's quieter, more serious, less likely to explain herself, less likely to chase, less likely to stay somewhere she is not valued simply because leaving feels uncomfortable. She is not easy, and that is not a flaw. She is the most honest version of you that has ever existed, and she didn't arrive here because something went wrong. She arrived here because you finally, after all of it, chose yourself. Not loudly, not dramatically, just completely. The world wanted you to keep going, to keep giving, to stay open and available and endlessly forgiving, to be the kind of woman who absorbs and adjusts and never asks for too much. And you stopped, quietly, completely, with no announcement and no explanation. And in that silence, in that simple, unshakable decision to stop, you became the one thing they were never prepared for. A woman who knows exactly who she is, and will not pretend otherwise for anyone.